The warmth you feel on your face is not the output of a constant and eternal star, but rather the discharge of a solar capacitor that functions on a cycle of 12,000 years. While the standard solar model assumes a baseline of long-term stability, the geological record provides a different set of measurements that indicate a periodic instability in the solar magnetic field. This field is not a permanent feature of our local system, but a fluctuating barrier currently undergoing a measured and predictable decline toward a state of total collapse. We are observing a system that operates with the mechanical regularity of a clock, where the primary variable is the strength of the magnetosphere and its ability to modulate incoming radiation. When this magnetic shield weakens, the planet is exposed to an influx of galactic cosmic rays that leave a permanent chemical signature in the polar ice sheets. This is not a matter of speculation or archaeological theory, but a forensic analysis of isotope concentrations that have remained undisturbed for hundreds of thousands of years. The data indicates that we are currently approaching the terminal phase of the current cycle, as the magnetic field has lost 20% of its total strength since the year 1850. The following analysis will detail the isotope evidence and the historical precedent for the magnetic excursion that is now underway, presenting the timeline as an inevitable result of solar physics. The primary mechanism for tracking this solar periodicity is the accumulation of beryllium-10 within the stratigraphic layers of the Greenland and Antarctic ice cores. Beryllium-10 is a cosmogenic isotope produced in the upper atmosphere when high-energy galactic cosmic rays collide with nitrogen and oxygen atoms. Under normal conditions, the Earth's magnetic field and the solar wind act as a dual-layered shield, deflecting the vast majority of these particles away from the planet. However, when a magnetic field strength drops below a specific threshold, the flux of cosmic rays entering the atmosphere increases exponentially, leading to a massive spike in beryllium-10 production. This isotope then precipitates out of the atmosphere and is sequestered in the annual layers of ice, creating a high-resolution ledger of the planet's magnetic history. When we analyze these cores, we do not see a random distribution of isotopes, but rather a series of distinct, massive spikes that appear with mechanical precision every 12,000 years. The half-life of beryllium-10, which is approximately 1,380,000 years, ensures that these signatures remain stable and measurable long after the events have concluded. By calculating the concentration of these isotopes relative to stable isotopes like beryllium-9, we can determine the exact intensity of the cosmic ray flux at any given point in the geological past. The presence of these spikes indicates a recurring failure of the planetary shield that is directly tied to the solar magnetic cycle. These are not isolated anomalies, but the fingerprints of a systemic collapse that occurs when the solar capacitor reaches its discharge point and the terrestrial magnetic field undergoes a polarity excursion. The data shows that during these intervals, the magnetic field does not simply flip overnight, but instead enters a period of rapid decay where the dipole strength vanishes, leaving the atmosphere vulnerable to high-energy particles. This process follows a predictable decay curve that we are currently able to map using modern magnetometers and paleomagnetic data from volcanic rocks. The forensic evidence suggests that the Earth's magnetic field is not a static shield, but a dynamic system that is currently losing its structural integrity at an accelerating rate. We are witnessing the transition from a stable magnetic state to an unstable one, a process that has been documented multiple times in the ice core record. The mathematical probability of this being a random fluctuation is statistically insignificant when compared to the 12,000-year periodicity of the beryllium-10 spikes. The record is clear. The shield fails on a schedule, and the schedule is currently being met. 12,000 years ago, the ice core record shows a massive spike in beryllium-10 that corresponds exactly with the onset of the Younger Dryas period. During this window, the magnetic field's strength collapsed to near zero levels, allowing a surge of radiation to penetrate the atmosphere and alter the chemical composition of the stratosphere. This event was not caused by a singular external impact, but by the periodic discharge of the solar magnetic system that occurs at the end of each 12,000-year cycle. The resulting environmental shifts were catastrophic, leading to the rapid extinction of megafauna across multiple continents and the sudden disappearance of the Clovis culture in North America. We see the forensic evidence of this collapse not just in the isotopes, but in the sudden termination of biological lineages that had thrived for tens of thousands of years. The magnetic excursion of 12,000 years ago provides a perfect template for the physical processes that occur when the planetary shield is removed. The mathematical correlation between the isotope spike, the magnetic decay, and the mass extinction event is absolute. It represents a total system reset that is triggered by the inherent variability of the Sun's magnetic output. The collapse of the magnetic field 12,000 years ago was characterized by a rapid decline in dipole strength, followed by a chaotic multipole state, which is the same pattern we are observing today. During this period, the planet's protection against solar proton events and galactic cosmic rays was effectively neutralized, leading to increased ionization of the atmosphere and large-scale climatic shifts. The isotope data from this era shows a sustained period of high cosmic ray flux that matches the duration of the magnetic excursion. This was the moment the previous 12,000-year clock ran out, resulting in a global transition that redefined the biosphere. The forensic analysis of the sediment layers from this time reveals a world undergoing a violent recalibration, driven by the loss of the magnetic envelope. There is no evidence in the isotope record to suggest that this was a unique or one-time occurrence. Rather, it is the most recent iteration of a cycle that extends back through the entire Pleistocene. The precision of these events allows us to treat the geological record as a diagnostic tool for predicting the behavior of the current magnetic field. We are not looking at a mystery, but at a well-documented physical process that is reaching its conclusion. The current measurements of Earth's magnetic field show a 20% loss in total intensity since the mid-19th century, a rate of decay that mirrors the lead-up to the last Beryllium-10 spike. Since 1850, the movement of the magnetic North Pole has accelerated from a slow drift to a rapid sprint toward the Siberian coastline, indicating a profound shift in the underlying core dynamics. This acceleration is a classic precursor to a magnetic excursion, where the stable dipole field begins to break down into smaller, weaker magnetic cells. The forensic data from previous collapses shows that as the field strength drops, the rate of decay increases exponentially, leading to a terminal collapse within a few centuries of the initial decline. We are currently in the steepening curve of that decay, where the mathematical projections indicate a total shield failure in the near future. This is not a speculative forecast based on climate modeling, but a direct extrapolation of measured magnetic field strength over the last 170 years. The math is simple and clinical. The field is failing at a rate that matches the 12,000-year cycle discovered in the ice cores. The inevitability of this process is found in the convergence of the isotope data and the current magnetic measurements. We have identified the 12,000-year periodicity of the Beryllium-10 spikes. We have confirmed the last event occurred exactly 12,000 years ago, and we are currently observing a 20% decline in the shield strength. These three data points form a forensic timeline that suggests the current cycle is reaching its end. The magnetic field is the only thing standing between the atmosphere and the high-energy environment of space, and that field is currently in an advanced state of deterioration. The standard solar model's assumption of long-term constancy is contradicted by the physical evidence preserved in the ice, which shows a sun that is fundamentally variable and periodic. Our analysis of the Beryllium-10 clock indicates that the planetary shield is not a permanent fixture, but a temporary phenomenon that is now scheduled for another collapse. The data does not require belief or interpretation. It only requires an acknowledgement of the measured rates of decay and the historical frequency of the isotope spikes. The shield is failing on schedule, and the forensic record tells us exactly what happens next. The 20% decline in magnetic field strength is not distributed evenly across the planet, but manifests as a systemic weakening of the global dipole moment. Magnetometer readings from the last century indicate that the primary field, which acts as the main barrier against solar radiation, is undergoing a transition from a stable state to a chaotic multipole configuration. This process is most visible in the South Atlantic anomaly, a vast region where the magnetic field strength has already dropped to 40% of its expected baseline value. In this zone, the radiation environment of space reaches significantly closer to the Earth's surface, providing a real-time laboratory for the effects of a failing magnetosphere. This is not an isolated geographical quirk, but a diagnostic symptom of the liquid iron core's convection currents beginning to destabilize and fragment. As the dipole field breaks down, the magnetic energy is redistributed into smaller, weaker magnetic cells that cannot provide the same level of global protection. Paleomagnetic data extracted from volcanic rocks and deep-sea sediment cores shows that this same pattern of localized weakening and fragmentation preceded every major magnetic excursion in the geological record. The forensic evidence suggests that the South Atlantic anomaly is the first visible fracture in a shield that is losing its structural integrity on a global scale. Declination measurements confirm that the field lines are warping in a manner that matches the precursor phases of previous beryllium-10 spikes. The velocity of the magnetic North Pole provides a second, equally critical measurement of this accelerating decay, currently moving at 50 kilometers per year, which is 10 times faster than when your grandparents were born. For most of the 20th century, the pole moved at a relatively stable rate of approximately 10 kilometers per year, a speed consistent with the standard secular variation of a healthy dipole. However, since the late 1990s, this velocity has increased fivefold, with the pole now racing toward the Siberian coastline. This shift from a linear progression to an exponential acceleration is a hallmark of a system approaching a phase transition. In the context of fluid dynamics within the Earth's outer core, this acceleration indicates that the primary magnetic engine is no longer maintaining its historical orientation or stability. We are observing a mechanical failure of the planetary dynamo that is currently occurring 10 times faster than it was during the 19th century. This rate of change is not compatible with a stable magnetic state and matches the high-velocity movements recorded in sediment cores just before the last beryllium-10 spike. The instruments are not showing a random fluctuation or a temporary wobble, but a directional and accelerating collapse of the magnetic framework. This pole velocity is a direct measurement of the internal torque and turbulence currently disrupting the Earth's magnetic generation. The convergence of three independent data sets creates a forensic timeline, indicating that we are not predicting the collapse, but measuring it in real time. First, we have the beryllium-10 isotope periodicity, which establishes a clear 12,000-year interval between major solar magnetic discharges and terrestrial shield failures. This periodicity has been verified through multiple ice core samples from both Greenland and Antarctica, ensuring the signal is global rather than regional. Second, the stratigraphic record confirms that the last major isotope spike and magnetic collapse occurred exactly 12,000 years ago, placing the current era at the precise end of the established cycle. This chronological alignment is not a coincidence, but a measurement of a recurring solar terrestrial cycle that functions with mechanical regularity. Third, we have the direct measurement of the current magnetic field, which has declined 20% since 1850 and is now entering an exponential decay phase. When these three variables are plotted together, they do not suggest a future event in a distant geological epoch, but rather a process that is already 80% complete. The probability calculation for a significant magnetic excursion within the current century is increasing as the dipole strength continues to vanish. We are not making a prediction based on a new theory or a speculative model, but rather a mathematical extrapolation based on high-fidelity physical measurements and historical precedent. The mathematical inevitability of this timeline is rooted in the fact that there is no known mechanism to intervene in or restart the planetary dynamo once it begins a polarity excursion. The Earth's magnetic field is a product of massive thermal and compositional gradients in the liquid outer core, and once the symmetry of these currents is broken, the field must complete its decay cycle before it can reorganize. This is analogous to the half-life of a radioactive isotope. The decay is a fundamental property of the system as current state and follows a predictable downward curve that cannot be altered by external atmospheric conditions. The data shows that we have moved past the point of stable equilibrium and are now in the terminal phase of the 12,000-year cycle. The reduction in field strength from 80% of its 1850 baseline toward the 0-point threshold is a matter of simple arithmetic and measurable rates. The forensic analysis of the Beryllium 10 clock indicates that the window for the next solar discharge and magnetic collapse is currently open. This is not a matter of if the shield will fail, but a measurement of how much of it remains. The shield is failing on the same schedule recorded in the ice, and the mechanism is periodic, not random. The Beryllium 10 clock has run for 12,000 years. The magnetic field has declined 20%, and the decay curve is now exponential. The math does not require belief, it only requires arithmetic. The collapse of the magnetic shield does not kill you directly, but rather kills the infrastructure that keeps you alive by inducing a sequence of cascading failures throughout every interdependent network of modern civilization. When a magnetic field strength reaches the critical threshold of collapse, the flux of galactic cosmic rays and solar protons increases by more than 100 times the current baseline, leading to a massive ionization of the upper atmosphere. This atmospheric ionization creates a high radiation environment that immediately neutralizes the global satellite network, rendering GPS, telecommunications, and weather monitoring systems non-functional within a matter of hours. Without the positional data provided by GPS, the precision timing required for the operation of the global electrical grid begins to drift, causing a synchronization failure that triggers automatic shutdowns across entire continents. Simultaneously, the collapsing magnetic field allows for the formation of massive geomagnetic-induced currents that flow through the long-distance transmission lines of the high-voltage power grid. These currents lead to transformer saturation and the eventual melting of copper windings within the massive substations that underpin the entire energy distribution system. Unlike a temporary solar flare or the 1859 Carrington event, this magnetic state is sustained, meaning the damage to the electrical infrastructure is not a momentary surge, but a permanent degradation. The failure of these transformers is catastrophic because they cannot be manufactured or replaced without a functioning electrical grid, creating a closed loop of systemic paralysis. Modern civilization is not a robust system, but a series of interdependent networks where each layer assumes the stability and functionality of the base electrical layer. When the electrical grid fails, the just-in-time inventory systems that manage global food supplies come to an immediate and total halt, as logistics software and transportation networks lose their operational capacity. Most major urban centers operate on a 72-hour buffer of food and essential supplies, meaning that mass civil unrest and food riots are a mathematical certainty within 3 days of the initial grid failure. The loss of refrigeration leads to the immediate destruction of the global medical supply chain as insulin, vaccines, and essential pharmaceuticals spoil without temperature control. Furthermore, the modern water distribution system relies almost entirely on electrical pumps to maintain pressure and move water from reservoirs to residential areas. Without electricity, the supply of clean water vanishes within hours, leading to widespread dehydration and the rapid spread of waterborne diseases as people turn to untreated sources. This sequence of failure is mechanical and predictable, following the same logic as a multi-car collision on a high-speed motorway, where the momentum of the system ensures its own destruction. The Beryllium 10 spike in the ice record represents not just a radiation event, but the chemical signature of a civilizational reset that occurs when the technological layer is stripped away. The absence of detailed record from the last reset is not a mystery or a conspiracy, but a predictable result of the collapse sequence and the inherent fragility of human knowledge transmission. Literacy and the preservation of complex information require a surplus of labor and resources, where a significant portion of the population is freed from the daily requirement of food acquisition to focus on record keeping. When a magnetic shield fails and the infrastructure collapses, the survivors are immediately pushed back to a hunter-gatherer baseline where the primary focus is immediate biological survival rather than the maintenance of a written history. Writing systems are a relatively recent human invention, dating back only approximately 5,000 years, which means they were entirely absent during the last magnetic excursion 12,000 years ago. While oral traditions attempt to preserve the memory of these events through global flood myths and tales of celestial fire, the specific technical details are invariably corrupted over thousands of years of verbal transmission. The knowledge required to build complex machines or understand solar physics is not an inherent human trait, but a specialized dataset that requires a stable, multi-generational infrastructure to survive. Without schools, libraries, or digital storage, the collective knowledge of a civilization can be effectively erased within 3 generations. The archaeological record provides forensic evidence of this amnesia in the form of massive stone monuments that survive long after the context of their construction has been lost to time. Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey is a primary example, as its construction and deliberate burial date back exactly 12,000 years, coinciding precisely with the last Beryllium-10 spike and the onset of the Younger Dryas. The fact that such a sophisticated complex was built and then entombed suggests a culture that was attempting to preserve something of its existence before the final collapse of its social structure. However, because the survivors of that era lacked a durable writing system that could persist through the subsequent millennia of nomadic survival, the purpose and meaning of the site remained a total mystery until its discovery in the 20th century. We see the same pattern in the construction of the pyramids and other megalithic structures, where the engineering precision suggests a level of knowledge that exceeds the documented capabilities of the cultures that inherited them. These are not the works of extraterrestrials, but the remnants of previous human iterations that reached a peak of complexity before being reset by the 12,000-year solar cycle. Each time the clock runs out, the survivors are forced to start over from the geological baseline, treating the ruins of the previous world as the works of gods or giants. We are not the first technological civilization to reach this point of systemic vulnerability, but we are simply the first to have the magnetometers and ice core drills necessary to measure our own decline. The previous iteration of humanity 12,000 years ago had neither the tools to predict the magnetic collapse nor the means to record its specifics for our benefit. They left us stone monuments and fractured myths, while we will leave them a layer of plastic and a massive spike of Beryllium-10 in the polar ice. The forensic data indicates that the 12,000-year cycle is a fundamental feature of the solar system's operation, and our current position on the timeline is at the terminal edge of the current window. The 20% decline in the magnetic field since 1850 is the primary indicator that the planetary dynamo is entering the same state of failure that preceded the extinction of the megafauna and the collapse of the Clovis culture. This is a cold and clinical reality that does not care about our political structures, our economic theories, or our belief systems. The planetary shield is a temporary feature of a variable star system, and its periodic failure is the mechanism that prevents any single iteration of civilization from achieving permanent stability. The convergence of the Beryllium-10 periodicity, the current magnetic decay rate, and the historical record of civilizational reset creates a timeline that is mathematically inevitable. We are observing a system that has reached its limit and is now undergoing a phase transition that will redefine the biosphere and the human experience. The clock is not counting down to the end of the world, but to the end of this world, the one built on the assumption of a permanent and stable magnetic shield. The isotopes in the Greenland ice will record our collapse with the same mechanical precision that they used to record the last one, providing a chemical ledger for whoever survives to drill into the ice 12,000 years from now. The forensic analysis is complete, and the results are consistent across every dataset we have analyzed. The magnetic field is failing on schedule, the solar capacitor is preparing for discharge, and the infrastructure of the modern age is not designed to survive the transition. The ice preserves what human memory cannot, and the beryllium-10 spike will occur whether you accept the data or not. The ice does not require your belief. It only requires your atoms.